and to Seido, our wonderful guest from Eugene, Zen West, Empty Field Zendo, and my dear Dharma sister. Thank you so much for coming and being with us this evening and offering your Dharma. So take it away, Seido.
Well, it's very nice to be here. I think this might be the first time I'm joining on a Sunday evening, since it's hard to believe, but I think that might be true, as the pandemic just brought my energies so close to home, Zooming with our own Sangha. But it strikes me as, every time is a wonderful time to practice, and each has its own quality. And this Sunday evening feels like the end of an exhale of a long weekend before the big, for me at the farm, big inhale on a Monday morning. So there's this lovely sweetness. And so I apologize ahead of time for all these words I'm about to say, instead of just being with this sweet silence with you all. The title of my talk is Crisis by Moonlight, and I will begin. Our Sangha this month is using koans from a book by Barry Magid, who's a psychoanalyst, book called Nothing is Hidden. So after our inspiring sesshin together with our joint sanghas and unfolding a koan, I decided to continue that practice of group koan work. And it's really wonderful because Barry speaks to my deep intuition in my so far years of practice, that there is an equal call to resolve the wounded places that we carry in the hidden armor that closes off our heart, simultaneously with transcending this illusion of a separate self. It's a bit of a paradox. And yet both aspects of practice, healing and wholeness, and the transcendent, both speak to great liberation. And when we are doing both of those together, the insights from practice infuse everything we do, all our relationships. So as a psychoanalyst, Barry speaks to that for me. So I'll bring out a koan. This is from Great Master Matsu. And some of you might recognize this because it's a bit of a known koan. Great Master Matsu was seriously ill. The Shuso asked, "Teacher, how is your health these days?" Matsu replied, "Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha." So that's the koan. It shows up actually both in the Blue Cliff record and the Book of Serenity in the advanced koans. So a little background in Buddhist cosmology, in the idea that there were thousands of Buddhas before Shakyamuni's time. A sun-faced Buddha is supposedly lived for 1800 years, and moon-faced Buddha lived for 1 day and 1 night. It's important information to have about this koan. But just like we did on retreat, I want to feel our way into this exchange that might seem kind of ordinary. Things I've actually just learned about this week. Of course, Matsu is one of our Chinese ancestors from the 8th century, very famous. But the scene itself is really tender. And Great Master Matsu is probably very old, seriously ill. Now, to be seriously ill in ancient China does not mean you're in a hospital with a comfortable bed and a nurse and an IV and a painkiller. To be seriously ill is probably quite difficult without the aids of the modern world. He is dying. And I didn't know this until this week, but actually it said in this koan that he dies the next day. So the Shuso, his student, who goes to speak with him and to say something like, "Teacher, how's your health these days?" says something about his mind state as a student. And many of us may have been in that role, going to someone who is dying or very ill with a lighthearted hope. "How's your health? How are you doing there?" Some kind of perhaps false cheeriness in the face of the truth. But Matsu, we can imagine also as a wise master, probably in pain, may be there because of his answer. We can hear that he likely has a thin smile on his face and is at deep peace with his life. Deep peace. And because he is that ill, perhaps he even says it very quietly, not matter-of-factly, sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha, but very quietly and slowly for a student to hear. Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. So this moment between the teacher and student is incredibly poignant. No student wants to lose their teacher. In my own experience, where my teacher suddenly died unexpectedly at 66, I also didn't want him to go. And if I was in this scene, I would also be the student, hopeful, saying, "How are you doing? How can we coax you back to life?" An ordinary exchange. But in this koan, and I hope you, each of you help me unfold this tonight, if we understand what Matsu did in the very cells of our body, we live life from a very deeply settled truth and a fearless, open-hearted presence in the face of life as it is. This koan that is brought out very lightly often is very deep. So I will shift gears because I'm going to take a few liberties with the koan, come back to my theme. I've been examining the Dharma of crisis recently, just asking what is it about crisis that changes us? It's so subjective. What's a crisis for you may not be a crisis for me. And yet we each experience it as an event that is just so totally and unexpectedly here, has arrived. Something that upturns all our routines and really commands or grabs our psychic space and demands total attention. No matter what we choose, we keep coming back to it. The crisis calls everything into question. And mostly, the mark of a crisis is that we feel unprepared and not up for the task. And we usually meet a crisis, if we're honest, with a resounding no. At least I do. So no one escapes these events, even though we try. Ordinary people lose loved ones to death. Ordinary people get fired from a job they love. Ordinary people get divorced. Ordinary people are falsely incarcerated. Ordinary people receive a sudden diagnosis. And I come back to this because it's very easy when we come to practice to almost overlook the importance of the teachings of impermanence, anicca. Whether things live for a long time or a short time. Anicca is one of the marks of existence that the Buddha taught as something to deeply understand and realize. And it's one thing to study impermanence with the petals dropping off the daffodils, or our car breaks down. But it's another to study impermanence when we lose the things we cherish. So my questions this month have been around how do we practice with a life-changing moment or event? And what is it that Matsu is saying to us here with sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha? Because it's really crisis that tests and hones our practice. I come to this with my own mid-crisis study. And some of you were on retreat where I was in the just beginning to see something unfold neighboring my land. So one thing that I deeply cherish in my life is the earth. I've made my living on this particular land for 30 years. I can see it out my window since I'm home. I've touched every inch of this ground on my hands and knees and bare feet, and planted plants and harvested them and shared them with the community. And along with that comes a sensitivity to the air and the water and everything around the farm. It's our place of practice. My life, my marriage is here. So it was a great shock to my body as a neighboring person who's renting some land began to haul on car after car, junked cars, and trailer loads of trash and engines, and around the creek and a recent clear cut. So that the environment within a matter of weeks has been completely transformed by garbage and noise and perhaps leaking transmission fluid and oils and comings and goings and traffic. And so each moment as the situation kept going, I could feel in my body and know that this was going to test me even as I sat, my consciousness drawing back again and again to this radical change in my environment and what it means to treat the land in a kind of way we've been accustomed to in the West as a garbage dump, basically. So I'll come back to that, but I have learned something from this koan. So I want to take a few teachings from sun-faced and moon-faced Buddha. Because one thing I've come to understand that it is so important when in crisis to bring the light of sun-faced Buddha, to bring the patience of 1800 years of existence to the moment, to completely embrace our reaction and our experience of the crisis itself, which means to put aside, difficult as it is, everything in every way we try to solve the problem through all of the things to distract and deny, to rally our forces and rage, bargain, check out. Even these attempts at escape must also be experienced. So one of the things I sat with at our sesshin was a sense of rage, which is rare for me to feel in that way, to feel the heat in my body and the anger, not to act on it, but to actually realize how instinctual in my body it was to have that force called up in my animal body. There is a kind of, in crisis, there is a kind of death that we are invited to be liberated by. And the death there is the death of our ideas of how things are going and will go. Our ideas of permanence and an unchanging reality. No matter how long we've practiced, we still harbor these ideas as we go through life, and they're checked when something radical changes. For those of you who might get the Sun magazine, wonderful periodical, there's a recent article about the impact of death on our lives and how we behave. And one of the impacts, whether we know consciously about death or subliminally suggested about death, we humans react by doubling down on our core beliefs. So that, well, there was one study, many studies have been done by a researcher named Solomon, and they all come with the same conclusion. One was a group of judges who were given the task of fining, I believe, a prostitute for illegal activity. And then the test was done again, and there was a suggestion that the judges, that there was some death, their own death was suggested, not strongly. And it said that in the first test, the average fine for the prostitute was something like maybe under $100, maybe $80. And then the average in the second test amongst these judges was $450. So there was a movement to become more extreme in a punitive mindset. There's other studies that show if you're a smoker and death is suggested, you inhale more deeply and smoke more. If you're a drinker, you drink more. Okay, so all of our habits and worldviews come deeper. But what's interesting in Buddhism is that the opposite is suggested, which is that we let go. It's the opportunity to let go to all the views that we're clinging to not know. And it's this sun-faced Buddha patience when we can do this, not knowing, that shifts us in the midst of crisis. And when that shift happens, there's another phase, what I want to call a moonless night. Because we do not, crisis is something that is sustained over time. If we let go, we sometimes enter a place where we are tested and things are dark and unclear. Dark and unclear. Because things have been blown away. We had a guest speaker last week with some of my students, and they talked about their an opening experience they had where it felt like Hiroshima, where everything they once believed was gone, not a stick of wood remained. That kind of extremely leveled moment. And it's in this moonless night that we let go of the past tools we've used that no longer work in Buddhism. Anything that we've used to prop up or to make ourselves feel better don't work in those moments, and they can go. And it's that moonless night that our eyes begin to acclimate to the dark. And it's our willingness to be in the dark that changes everything. It's a shift in that moment, in the moonless night, that is about allowing ourselves to be changed, which in truth is the essence of Zazen, to allow ourselves to be changed. Last week, Yoko Carlson, a retired abbess of Dharma Zen Center, came to give a talk. And she was talking about a dark moment in her own practice life. And she said at this long retreat where she felt like she couldn't go on, sure, we know those moments, she was told to dig deep and to find her sense of will, find the seat of will. And she said, she described it like this. She said, I had to look through the miscellaneous drawer and throw everything out until I finally found it. It's perfect, right? We can look at the drawer in the kitchen with the rubber bands and the paper clips and the old plastic wrappers. Everything goes until you dig deep and finally find it. You find that hidden place that's sort of like a prayer that you didn't know you had. But if one can stay in that moonless night, then it's there. It appears. And it's when we can stay in this moonless space and we find the deep seat that the moon-faced Buddha emerges, that reflective wisdom. One of the pieces I appreciate in Barry's book, he talks about the difference between surrender and submission. Moon-faced Buddha is about surrender to what is. But the risk of all crisis is that we submit. Submission is a kind of way of giving up, but not in a way that allows us to grow. It just makes us smaller. To submit is to become a victim to life. And we do this a lot, right? To say, oh, well, whatever. It's just the bitterness of life. In a way, to submit is to refuse to be initiated by the crisis. And so our practice teaches about true surrender, which is a willing giving over in the service of something greater. A surrender is actually a profound yes to life as it is. Yes, life is coming with this. And to look it in the eye. It has no resentment or defeat, but it is a giving over. It is a giving over. And it's a place that allows us to come to a broader and deeper truth that is more grounded than whatever we had before, and a kind of softening to life. And it's interesting as I come back to my own crisis shared by my husband in this community, is that what's happened in the last couple of weeks is 30 years later, we have met and had conversations with people on this road that have been so loving and kind and connective that we never had before. We all say the same thing. All the agencies we've called can do nothing, on one hand. But meeting people, the neighbors and their young toddler, the person who stopped by today to talk with us, who volunteered to test the water, the other neighbor who called and said he's so concerned about what's happening in our community. All of these people, kind and concerned, have come to meet, to share a moment of things that we can't control. And yet something has changed in this meeting. Something is already being transformed, even though none of us wished this particular event to be. So I come back to this koan, I'll wind down, sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha, because I'm taking an unconventional view. In truth, their message about what is short-lived and long-lived is that that is not two. Sometimes we are ill, sometimes we are healthy. Sometimes the life is short, sometimes the life is long. But both the sun-faced Buddha and moon-faced Buddha are perfect and complete in themselves. Each moment of existence is whole, whether we live a long time or a short time. But I bring out these other pieces because we don't easily accept that. And we cannot bypass the deeper work as being human, allowing ourselves a human response to dukkha, moment to moment, in a way that changes us. We cannot bypass this being human with this practice, but we can deepen our humanity. In a crisis, and I imagine there's much wisdom in this room, since no one gets on without one, and maybe many, is quite an initiation into life. There is a beautiful tension when sun-faced Buddha and moon-faced Buddha are one. There's a tension between the eternal and timeless and just the beauty of this one moment. Just this one moment is all we have. And so to practice like Master Matsu is great liberation. But also I imagine that he faced an incredible loss to arrive at that one moment. And so sometimes we are the student saying no, not now. That's our human half. So I'll end there on my Crisis by Moonlight, Sun Face Buddha, Moon Face Buddha. And I now give you the koan, incomplete, and for you to solve.
Well, we have a few minutes to invite any questions. If anybody would like to